Hello and welcome to Trusts and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about estate planning, trust and estate administration, both from the standpoint of your own personal situation, as well as for professionals or people who are looking to potentially get into the business of helping people with estate planning and administration. So today, my topic is who should be on your estate planning team. Now, if you're a regular watcher of the show, so I've talked about these various people to a greater or lesser extent over the months that I've been doing this show. Actually, it's going on 2 years now, and I thought it would be a good idea to talk about it as a comprehensive subject because I see this coming up quite often in my practice, and that is people who really need the advice of competent professionals, but they don't have someone on their team in a particular area. And so I'm going to talk about 5 professionals that you may want to have or you may need to have on your team. I shouldn't say want, you may need to have on your team. And it will depend primarily on how complex an estate you have and also how large an estate you have. So just to review for a minute, when I say, when you hear the word estate, I think most of us think of, Downton Abbey, right? This big, essentially castle and all these lands and all that's an estate, right? In the United States, and this is true in Britain as well, by the way, an estate is merely just the all of the property that you own, essentially. So if you own a car and have a bank account and some clothes and other personal property, that is your estate. I mean, you have an estate. If you owned anything, you essentially have an estate. Now, again, some estates are much larger. So if you consider somebody who has a huge real estate portfolio or someone who has extensive stock holdings, so their estate could be worth millions, even tens of millions of dollars or more. So for someone at that level, their estate planning is going to be much more complex, and especially if, at least right now, the value of your estate exceeds $13 million, it means you're going to be paying estate taxes, okay, which on the federal level top out at 40%, and they go up to that 40% level pretty quickly. So, and there are other states that have estate taxes. For example, Minnesota still has an estate tax. There's, I think, 17 states, if I remember correctly, that have an estate tax. So if you have an estate of over $13 million, you're most likely going to be subject to estate taxes. And as of the end of next year, 2025, that limit is going to drop to $5 million or thereabouts. And so many more people who over the last number of years have been exempt from estate taxes are now going to have to pay estate taxes. So if you live here in California or in another high housing cost state, New York, I mean, even states like Florida now and Texas are getting ever more expensive properties. If you own a house, that already could easily mean you have an estate over $1 million. Now, that all by itself won't be enough to qualify to force you into a situation where you would owe estate taxes. But if you've got a retirement plan, let's say you have an IRA, and that IRA has $1 million in it, and maybe you own some stocks, pretty quickly you could have $3 or $4 million worth of value in your estate. And so you're coming up on that $5 million limit pretty quickly. And so you may need some estate planning to make sure that you don't get walloped by estate taxes. And so having the right people on your team will be crucial to that. So, like I said, I've got 5 categories is probably a better word, because some of them are distinct, but others of them are broader and could involve more than one issue. So first of all, number 1 on your list is having a lawyer, and not just any lawyer, but a lawyer who is involved in estate planning. Okay, because someone who does, let's say, family law, or does civil litigation or business law, those are different fields of practice than estate planning. And so they will not necessarily have the background, the experience, the knowledge to put together a proper estate plan for you. That's number 1. Number 2, most of the documents used in estate planning are actually fairly repetitive. So to hire an attorney who doesn't do estate planning essentially every day means you're likely to get someone who's going to be much more costly, because they're going to have to draft documents from scratch. And drafting documents from scratch is very, very problematic these days. So I can tell you, in my practice, if I'm dealing with real estate, if I can avoid it, I don't want to have to draft a lease from scratch. I would much rather use a form lease, because those leases over the years have been refined. They've been tailored to deal with specific problems that occur, and protect landlord and tenant in a way that's as just as can be for both sides. And there's been lots of expertise put into those leases. So, given my choice of drafting a lease from scratch or using a form lease with perhaps an addendum attached to it, I will go with the latter every single time. And the same is true in estate planning documents. So if you're going to have a trust created or a will, so you're much better off dealing with an estate planning attorney who has those documents in form, and then just makes the modifications that are necessary for your specific situation, rather than have one create those documents from scratch. Okay, aside from the likelihood that the documents that are essentially form documents will provide you with a much better product, it will also be much less expensive than to have the documents created from scratch, because it can be done much more quickly. And I've talked to some estate planning lawyers who are even looking into augmenting their forms using AI, so that they can do the document drafting part of their work very, very quickly. And so they can spend the bulk of their time talking with their clients, meeting with their clients, understanding better what their clients' needs are, so that when it gets to the drafting of the documents, that can be done very efficiently, but also highly tailored to the client. Now, will an estate planning lawyer be the only lawyer you need? Not necessarily. So estate planning lawyers can deal with wills and trusts. They can deal with things like durable powers of attorney, guardianship documents, those kinds of things. However, if you have a complex business and you need to do a buy-sell agreement in your business, or you need to do let's say you have an LLC, and for whatever reason you never did an operating agreement. So an estate planning attorney would not necessarily be the best person to do those kind of business planning documents. I talked about this, I think it was last week or the week before. So in that case, you would want a business attorney who, like the estate planning attorney, does these kinds of business documents all the time. Because again, you really don't want to be drafting an LLC operating agreement from scratch. more likely to have mistakes, leave things out, and also it's much more expensive. So go with a lawyer who does this all the time, has these documents already drafted in form, and then all he has to do is tailor them for your specific situation. Also, that lawyer is more likely to have experience with how these things actually work. So if you're going to do, for example, a buy-sell agreement, while an estate planning attorney may have some experience with them, a business attorney is more likely to have actual experience with the buy sell agreement being used, being executed, and how that worked out. What are the benefits? What are the pitfalls? Those are the kinds of things that you're going to want to know as you put this buy sell agreement together. So, in short, you may need more than one type of attorney if you have a large or complex estate. And if so, make sure you're getting that expert advice. Now, another situation where you may need more than one lawyer would be if you live in one state, but you have assets, for example, real estate in another state. So now you've got a cross-state situation, and the real estate might well be handled under the state of the law in which it is, as opposed to the law of the state in which you live. So in that case, you may need an estate planning attorney in each of those jurisdictions to make sure that your estate plan works the way that you want it to work. Okay, so all of those go into what you may need in terms of a lawyer or lawyers. Next, an accountant. Okay, especially if you have a larger estate and you may need to deal with paying estate taxes, right? That has to be dealt with. And the accountant that you choose will most likely be the one who's going to file the tax return for the estate. And so they're the one that's going to be determining in the end the estate tax liability. So you want them in from the beginning to make sure that you are optimizing your tax planning. Now, just because you're not going to pay estate taxes doesn't mean that you don't need accounting advice in your estate plan. So again, if you own a business and you have you're going to have a buy-sell agreement, or you have multiple heirs and there's issues of who should get what. So having an accountant to advise you on the potential results of various decisions can be very useful. It's also good to have someone who, as an accountant, who is in at the planning, because then they can know your intentions, and as they do their work at the time when they're actually doing the return for the estate. So they're doing that with the background knowledge they got by being a part of the estate planning process. Now, by the way, you may be thinking at this point, oh my gosh, I need maybe 2 lawyers and an accountant. This is going to cost me a bloody fortune. Not necessarily. So for the accountant, it may only take him a couple of hours to give you the advice that you need. Maybe you're just going to deal with him for certain specific questions, and so you may only be spending a few $100s there. It will be money well spent in order to potentially avoid problems down the road. Now, like with the attorney, choose an accountant who has estate administration and estate planning experience. So the typical accountant who prepares your tax return may not have the experience to do the level of estate planning that you need. Okay. Most accountants these days use programs in order to prepare tax returns. Those programs provide a lot of support in terms of appropriate questions and all of that. And it helps an accountant be much better at his job than having to know all of those questions to ask, in his head. However, that is not a substitute for an accountant who has dealt with estate planning issues and estate administration issues multiple times, have seen situations, have helped work through problems, and they can bring that knowledge and experience to your estate planning. And so again, you want someone who specializes in that. Okay, and that may not be your current accountant who's doing your tax returns and maybe helping you with some real estate transactions. Okay, so accountant, that's number two. Number three is financial service professionals. Now, this is a category more so than an individual, and that's because financial services is comprised of several parts. So first of all is insurance. So any sound estate plan, well, let me rephrase that. Most sound estate plans are probably going to have some insurance in them. Okay, it may just be health insurance, but you may need disability insurance. You may need long-term care insurance. You may need life insurance, especially if you have an estate large enough where you may be paying estate taxes. Life insurance is one of the best ways of potentially dealing with that uh, estate tax liability. And so in doing your estate planning, you're going to want to have a financial services professional who is very experienced in insurance. Not just insurance, though, insurance specifically in estate planning. So that's not to say that you can't work with someone who's maybe newer to the business, they don't have broad experience. But if you are dealing with someone who's newer to the business, make sure that whoever is supervising them is very experienced in estate planning, because there are specific issues to deal with. For example, if you're going to set up a life insurance trust in order to pay your estate taxes, there are very specific rules about that, how that has to be done. And you really don't want your lawyer and or accountant to have to educate your life insurance agent from the ground up. They should have a knowledge of how these things are done so that it can all be done efficiently and cost efficiently. Okay, so so insurance is number one, and again, this professional should be someone who understands the various potential insurance needs depending on where you are in your life, in your life. Now, generally speaking, there are two types of financial professionals in terms of how they're compensated. Okay, one is a fee-based compensation where you pay them a fee for their services, for their advice, and they shop among the various, in this case, let's take life insurance. They shop among the various life insurance providers to find the life insurance policy that will be best for you, but they're being paid by you to do that work. The other is a commission-based or a product-based financial services professional. They may work for a specific company. So, for example, Primerica, Transamerica. And in that case, they are selling that company's products, and that company is compensating them by giving them what amounts to a commission on those product sales. Okay, so you don't pay anything for the advice that you get. Now, some people say you should never work with a product oriented financial service professional. I don't agree with that philosophy. It really depends on what your situation is. So if you're just starting out and you don't have money to pay for a fee-based financial services professional, it may make a lot of sense to go with a product based professional. Like I said, Primerica, Transamerica, all these, New York Life. Okay. Just because they're being compensated by commissions paid by their company does not mean that you're getting bad advice. And a good financial services professional, even if they're company based, if they don't have a product that works for you within their company, they'll tell you that that's the case. Okay, so that's one of the things to look for is look for someone, no matter what, that they're absolutely client focused. Okay, and then how they're getting paid is perhaps less important, as long as they're very client service focused. Okay, but that is something to know about. So again, if you're just starting out and you're concerned, like, how am I going to pay for all of this? Well, you may decide to deal with a product based financial service representative, in which case it won't cost you anything up front. The premiums you pay for the insurance policies include compensation to the agent, the financial services professional, and so it's kind of essentially a pay as you go situation. Okay, so number one in financial services is insurance. Number two is retirement savings. Okay, now these days, a lot of employers have employer sponsored plans, 401ks. And in that case, you may not need to have a financial services professional to help you with your retirement planning per se. That may be a service that's offered by the plan administrator for your company. Okay. So take Voya, for example. Okay, Voya is one of the largest plan administrators in the country. So while the employer is the sponsor of the plan and Voya essentially runs the plan on their behalf, okay, Voya provides very, very robust training and learning resources for plan participants, which as the employee, you would be a plan participant. They provide access to customer service people who can answer questions, give investment advice. Okay. And although your company is paying for that, or it could be a hybrid where your company covers some of the cost and you cover some of the cost, that doesn't really matter because you still are getting the advice you need from a company. I'm just using Voya because I'm looking at a plan for a client right now that Voya is the administrator, so I just have them on their mind. Although I will say I think they have an incredible amount of resources in terms of helping people with their retirement planning. So in that case, if your primary retirement plan is a 401k sponsored by the company you work for, that may be all you need. Okay. However, if you have your own company, or if you are self-employed in the sense of you do, contract work, okay, so then maybe you have something like a SEP IRA or something like that. So then you may need to have a financial services professional who helps you with that and works as part of your estate planning team to understand how this aspect of your finances fits into the overall picture. Okay. Now, if you have an employer sponsored plan and you're getting your retirement advice from the plan's administrator, so you may have difficulty in trying to coordinate a meeting with that person and the other members of your estate planning team. Okay, they may not have the flexibility to do a meeting like that, but they might. Okay, and if not, you can get a list of questions from your other team members, what they need to know about your retirement plan, and give it to the person that you're dealing with there, get the answers, and then bring it back. Okay, it's maybe not quite as efficient, but it will still work. On the other hand, if you have a financial services professional who who works with you for your own retirement planning, so then that person could attend a meeting of your estate planning team, and so, hey, you know they're right there to chime in on issues that either the retirement plan affects or is affected by. Okay, and then the third financial services professional would be someone who is dealing with just wealth building more broadly. So while insurance and retirement plans are two pillars of wealth building, beyond that, you may have brokerage accounts, you may have investments in other types of properties, you may have investments in commodities, you may own some bonds, whatever kind of investments you have, you may have some crypto investments, whatever those are. So you may want a financial services advisor who deals with that as well. Now, in this we used to call these people, by the way, stockbrokers. When I was young, you Smith Barney and all, but stockbrokers have really morphed into financial service professionals who are really wealth building advisors. Okay, so whereas if you see movies, especially from the 50s and early 60s, where they portray stockbrokers and they're calling up, getting you to buy an individual stock or whatever, even for smaller retail clients, that's really not, they don't really do that anymore. I mean, some do, but most don't. Most have a, they're probably going to help you invest in things like mutual funds, ETFs, that sort of thing. Okay, and if you do have money to invest, so you would be well advised to get some expert guidance. Now, if you are in the financial services realm, so you may not need a separate advisor. But if you're not, markets today are very complicated. And to give you an example, I'm handling a situation where the decedent, very successful in real estate. He also had a large portfolio of securities that he self-managed. And I think that was a mistake on his part, because he managed it in a way that really did not maximize his return, nor did it really reduce his risk. He just kind of bought stocks that he had heard about, that he had heard were good, and that's not really a proper way to manage a stock portfolio. Now, if it had been just a little portfolio that he was playing around with for fun, okay, so no big deal. I used to do that myself, just to kind of, I try out an investment theory and see how it worked out. I have another friend who does that. That's one thing. That's not what I'm talking about here. Where we're talking about the real development of your wealth. So there are principles that you would be well advised to at least know about, if not follow. And if you're not involved in it on a very regular basis, you're probably much better served by having someone else who does do it on an constant basis, handling it for you. These services can be very inexpensive nowadays, and even for a small investor. So first of all, it may be that you don't pay anything at all, because for example, the mutual funds will pay a commission to someone who brings funds in. And so, like the insurance agent I was talking about, you're not paying any fee up front. Now, kind of a subset, although I put it in a separate category, because because, is something called a wealth advisor. Okay, so a wealth advisor, now this is typically for higher net worth individuals. However, more and more retail financial services companies are offering wealth management services to an ever lower amount of money, basically. So whereas it's, your wealth advisor, oh, I got to have what, at least $10 million. No, that clearly not the case. $1 million is the minimum for most, and a lot of wealth advisors will handle accounts even significantly lower than that. In fact, I think I'm going by memory now. I think Primerica, the minimum is only $25,000 to get into a wealth advisory program, and the fees are very, very reasonable. And when you're in a wealth advisory program, what that means is you have people who spend their whole day, their whole week, their whole month, their whole year managing money and making sure that it's handled as appropriately as possible. Okay, so if you have now, that, by the way, some wealth advisors will handle retirement funds as well as non-retirement funds. It varies, so it really depends. Okay, and by the way, a wealth advisor usually they have what's called an investment representative advisor. Investment advisor representative license. Okay, it's a securities license, and they either work for or they have an investment advisory firm. Okay, and I'm seeing more and more of these, and more of them are tailored to more middle class people because wealth is growing in this country, and a lot of it, of course, is in retirement plans. But once you have even $100,000, okay, you really want to consider engaging a wealth advisor, because that person can really help you through good times and bad, maximize the opportunity that may be present. Okay, and again, their fees can be very, very reasonable. So typical wealth advisory fee is around 1% of assets under administration. So if you've got $1 million, you're going to pay roughly $10,000 a year. Typically, that'll be paid monthly, so you're going to pay about $800 a month, right? And 1%. So they should be able to at least enhance your return by the amount of the fee. Okay, and as your portfolio gets larger, the fee tends to decline. So it varies, of course, depending on the wealth advisor, and that's obviously something you want to look into. But again, take a look at that. It may, and if you have, especially if you have significant liquid investments, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, those kind of things, you probably want either a wealth advisor or at least a financial services professional who deals with that all the time to be a member of your estate planning team to make sure everything is set up the best way it possibly can. All right, the last category, the fifth category, is real estate professionals or real estate advisors. So obviously, if you have no real estate, so then you don't need someone to advise you on it, okay? But if you own a house, okay, and these days, what the median home price in the United States is over $400,000. That's double what it was, I think, 10, 15 years ago. It's really astonishing how quickly home prices have increased. So if you own a home, and even if that's all you own, you'd be well advised to find a real estate agent who has specific knowledge about dealing with real estate in probate and or trust situations. Okay, this is very, very different than the typical real estate transaction. And just as an aside, on September 9th, I believe it is, my very good longstanding friend, Bill Gross, who's one of the top probate real estate agents, certainly in California, probably in the country, he's going to be on the show talking about changes in the way that real estate agents can get compensated. But you'll see that This is someone who is deeply, deeply, deeply knowledgeable, not just about real estate, but about all the special issues related to probates, estates, trusts, administration, all those issues. Okay. Now, the reason you want someone who has that specific knowledge is not just for the knowledge itself, although obviously that's critically important. You also want someone who's used to dealing with other estate planning professionals, who understands their language, who can help them understand the specific nature of real estate questions. Okay. So, using my friend Bill Gross as an example, I know Bill. He helps out lawyers, he helps out accountants, because each member of your team has their area of expertise. Okay, and they don't always, I should say, they rarely know the details of somebody else's area of expertise. That's why you want these other team members. And so when it looks like any team, right? A football team, whatever. You have your specialists, but when they come together, they will be very, very powerful on your behalf. So again, if what you have is a home or a condo, something like that, so you may only need a broker, but a broker who specializes in probate and estate real estate. However, if you have other real estate investments, and when I say other real estate investments, I mean direct property investments, as opposed to, for example, owning a share in a REIT, which is really that's a financial services product, really. So if you own an apartment building, a retail strip center, whatever it is, so you may be managing that property on your own. Okay. And that may be fine. Okay. However, just because you manage the property on your own doesn't mean that you are familiar with the property and asset management aspects well enough to be able to know how to handle these things in an estate planning context. And so, if you don't have that knowledge, you would be very well advised to have a property manager and or an asset manager, on real estate asset manager, on your estate planning team, so that they can see to it that various issues are brought up and built into your estate plan. Okay, so just for example, if you have multiple properties, okay, generally speaking, you're going to want to have each property in its own entity. Now, an estate planning lawyer would hopefully bring that up, but they're probably not going to have that as top of mind as a real estate asset manager is going to have, because they're dealing with the results of that all the time. They're dealing with the liability aspects and the various management aspects of that all the time. And but by the way, you in the case of real estate professionals, oftentimes you won't necessarily have to pay them. They'll be happy to consult, essentially gratis, for free, in order to establish a relationship. And just because they're not charging for it doesn't mean that the information isn't valuable. Okay, it really depends on the situation, but you definitely want to get that expert real estate advice. Now, if you live in a state like California and you are still managing your own property, okay, if you're doing that full time, that's one thing. If you're very knowledgeable, fine, okay. But if you have another job and your job is not related to real estate, it may be the situation that you would be much better off with a property manager. And let me give you an example of a situation from my own career. This is going back to before I joined the Navy, and I had a property management company, and second or third management client I took on, it was a married couple. The husband was a lawyer and the wife was a screenwriter, and they owned a quite beautiful building that had originally been built in I think it was late 1920s. The building was gorgeous. and it was really kind of their baby. So, but life was getting too busy for them, and so they decided to try hiring a property manager. Okay, and I did a presentation. They hired my company. Over the next 3 or 4 years, I showed them that their rents were anywhere from a half to 2/3 of market value, and that they were able to get these higher rents by actually spending less money renovating the units and still ending up with a superior product from the market's perspective. Okay. So, for example, these units, because they were built in the 20s, had these beautiful ceramic tile kitchens. Okay. And a lot of the units were occupied by elderly people who had lived there for a long, long time. One of them would, get too sick to live on their own. They'd move into a nursing home. And so now they'd have a vacant unit. And before they could rent it out, they had to renovate it. Okay. They'd have to sand down the hardwood floors and recoat them and that kind of thing. So they would go in and they would gut the kitchen and put in a kitchen with sort of, Formica countertops and white, cabinets or whatever. And I mean, they look fine. Don't get me wrong. But the people who were coming to that neighborhood loved the 1920s look of the ceramic tile and the glass fronted kitchen cabinets and that kind of thing. And so I had someone who was able to go in and renovate these existing kitchens in a way that made them more functional without losing the aesthetic quality of them. And that was less expensive than gutting the kitchen and putting in a brand new kitchen. And so how did that work out for them? Well, number one, their renovation costs went down. 2, the desirability of their units went up. 3, they were able to get higher rents. So 4, their building value increased even more, right? So that's something to consider as you're building your estate planning team and building your wealth. Is, do you really have the time, the resources, the expertise to maximize your investments, whether it's your financial investments, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc., or whether it's real estate? These are all ever more specialized fields. And so, just because you've been doing them for a while doesn't mean that you necessarily should continue handling them. It may be much better for you to focus your energies on what you know best, your professional endeavors, and bring in the experts to handle these investments for you, and then also have access to them as members of your estate planning team. Okay, so just real quickly, the 5 categories: lawyers, accountants, financial services professionals, wealth advisors, real estate professionals. Those are the 5 areas that I would encourage you to think about as you put together your estate planning team. And again, that which of those you're going to have is really going to depend on your individual circumstances. Where do you find these people? So ask around, talk to friends, family members who have already done their estate planning. Did they like the person they dealt with? Did they not like the person they dealt with? In which case you want to stay away from them. Okay. There are professional associations. So most bar associations, for example, have an estate planning or an estate planning administrative section. You can go there. If you have a business attorney, you can ask for a referral to an estate planning attorney. Same with accountants, same with financial services professionals. And, if as your referrer of last resort, you can also ask me for a referral. I'm happy to do so. I maintain relationships with people across the country and would be happy to make introductions to people who I know, who I've vetted and would vouch for in terms of I think they would do a good job for you. So you can post a comment in social media if you want a referral. If for whatever reason you want to keep that private, so send me an email. All of those links will be in the show notes. after this episode posts on YouTube. So, if you also obviously, if you have any questions, comments, good, bad, whatever, as always, those are welcome as well. So, I thank you very much for joining me today. And tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And I'm going to be talking about the subject, when compromise is best. So compromise seems to have become kind of a dirty word these days, but sometimes compromising is the best thing that you can do. I'm going to use some, and you may say, the military compromises. Oh, yes, they do. Certainly I did as a chaplain. So join me tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pacific time, for a couple of I think at least somewhat humorous, if not outright funny, incidents that I'm going to relate to you to emphasize my point. And then on Wednesday at 10 a.m. is Economic Echoes. This is our monthly time to look at economic factors and see how do they affect each one of us as individuals. So I invite you to join me Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, again, for Economic Echoes. So again, thanks so much for joining me. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. And signing off, Marie, darling, you are my bell.